Hello, welcome to this session on discovering the word of wisdom. My name is Jane Birch, and I'm thrilled to be speaking to the saints in New Zealand. I want you to know that even though I've never had the chance to visit the great country of New Zealand, I've always felt it was the greatest of all countries. This all started when I was 12 years old. When I was 12, my dear grandparents, Phil and Virginia Birch, were called to serve as missionaries to New Zealand. We loved getting their letters. They were filled with love for the people of New Zealand. And of course, we grew to love the people that they loved so much. So that was the beginning of my love affair with the great country of New Zealand. It's really an honor and a privilege to be able to talk to you today. I'm going to share with you something that I feel like is very valuable, and I hope you'll find some worth in it. Today, I get the privilege and honor of sharing my story of my rediscovery of the word of wisdom. Now, since I grew up in the church, of course, I learned about the word of wisdom from the time I was very small, but it wasn't until I was 50 years old that I discovered in this great revelation from the Lord, there are some precious dietary principles and counsel that could have a dramatic impact on the incidence of chronic disease in the world if we took them seriously. I'm going to share these principles with the idea that I found them useful, but please don't take my word for it. I encourage everyone, of course, to do their own study and prayer of the word of wisdom. And I hope that the Spirit of the Lord will touch your heart and that you'll find something that you feel like is useful for your journey. Now, I wish I was there in person to talk with you. To tell you the truth, it's difficult speaking to you through this video. Right now, I'm by myself. I'm speaking into a camera, into the computer screen. So there's not that intimacy, but I'm doing my best to imagine that you are here with me because what I want to share with you I feel is very, very valuable. And I hope that there will be something in my message that is of worth to you. So thank you for taking this time with me today. So my story began in 2011. One Saturday morning, I just happened to catch a preview for a TV show on CNN called The Last Heart Attack. In this show, Dr. Sanjay Gupta was presenting the evidence that demonstrated that most cases of coronary artery disease could be prevented simply through changing our diet. Now, this was very surprising to me and very interesting to me, not because I had any high risk factors myself for heart disease, but because I was well aware that heart disease is the #1 killer in the world. It's the #1 killer in the United States. It's the #1 killer in New Zealand. In fact, it's the #1 killer in all the world. And here was a show claiming that we could prevent most of this disease and most of the money spent on this terrible disease simply through changing our diet. I decided I wanted to investigate. Well, in the show, it featured the work of Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn from the Cleveland Clinic. He was one of the experts. Now, Dr. Esselstyn was a general surgeon. He specialized in surgeries such as breast cancer and thyroid cancer. But something concerned Dr. Esselstyn, and that was no matter how many surgeries he did, he was doing absolutely nothing for the next unsuspecting victim. This troubled Dr. Esselstyn. He was happy to play a role in trying to help patients who had already had these cancers, but he wanted to do more to prevent these things from happening. So Dr. Esselstyn, in his spare time, did some research, and he looked around the world, and what he discovered really fascinated him, because what he discovered was that the incidence and rate of cancer in the various countries varies dramatically, not just by a little bit, but dramatically. And that was highly correlated with the type of foods that they were eating. And this was true of other chronic diseases as well. Well, Dr. Esselstyn noted that the diet that seemed to be best for not just cancer, but these other diseases, is basically a whole food, plant-based diet. Now, what is whole food, plant-based? Well, whole foods are foods as they look when we pull them out of the ground or pluck them off the tree. It's before they're refined or they're processed. These are whole foods. And then, of course, plant foods are foods that are not animal foods. There's 3 types of animal foods: meat, dairy, and eggs. So having discovered this information and being a scientist, Dr. Esselstyn really wanted to test his hypothesis. Now, he decided he shouldn't test on cancer patients because cancer is very multifactorial and takes a very long time to grow. And so he decided to instead address the #1 killer around the world, which I've said is heart disease. Now, I put the picture of this tiger here just to show how ferocious this disease is. I mean, it kills more people than any other disease. And I looked at the statistics in New Zealand. Sure enough, it's the #1 cause of death in New Zealand, as it is in the United States. It causes in New Zealand more than 6,000 deaths per year. That's 1 person for every 90 minutes. And the total cost is is over 500 million New Zealand dollars a year. So that is a tremendous amount of suffering and money that goes into disease that Dr. Esselstyn found through his research suggested that possibly we could prevent this through eating a healthier diet. So Dr. Esselstyn was a very busy surgeon. He didn't have a lot of time to work on his experiment, but he wanted to work with some heart disease patients. So he invited his cardiovascular colleagues at the Cleveland Clinic to send him some of their patients that would be willing to be tested on this diet. Well, his colleagues ended up sending him the worst of the very most diseased patients that they had, the patients they had given up on, the patients that they considered might even die within the next year. In total, Dr. Esselstyn received 24 cardiovascular patients. He educated them on this diet, and he invited them to join him. 18 of them adopted the whole food plant-based diet. And over time, sure enough, just as Dr. Esselstyn had hypothesized, and just as the research had suggested to him, all of these were able to stop the progression of their disease. Well, even though this is a small study, it is significant because he had essentially 100% success rate. This is not something that we see with other treatments of heart disease. Even the best treatments do not produce these type of results. And so this got Dr. Esselstyn very excited, and he continued on his path to teaching not just his heart disease patients, but all patients, and introducing them to whole food, plant-based nutrition. Interestingly, Dr. Esselstyn followed up this study in 2014. In that study, he had almost 200 cardiovascular patients, and of those, 177 adopted the diet, so pretty high compliance rate. And of those, almost all, 176, stopped the progression of their disease. And when I read a little further, I actually found out that the one person who had a problem with heart disease later had actually cheated on the diet. But let's just say 176 of 177 who adopted this diet were able to stop the progression of their disease. And not just that, the x-ray or the exams, their arteries that show the circumference of the arteries and the amount of blockage actually showed that those with serious disease, some of them, the arteries had gotten even wider. So in other words, they had begun to reverse the consequences of those disease. The blood was flowing even more smoothly. So it not only stopped, but actually reversed the incidence of heart disease. So this was pretty amazing. Well, how is this done? Let me just pause a moment to describe a little bit about what happens in heart disease. Probably most of you are familiar with this, so this will be a review. In the top image here, we see a healthy blood vessel. All of the blood is flowing without obstruction through the healthy artery. In the second image, we see the beginning of a plaque formation in the cell wall of the artery. This is at the beginning of atherosclerosis. This is the beginning of the hardening of the arteries. What happens when we eat foods that are not good for us, when we eat processed foods, when we eat animal foods that are high in fat and cholesterol, the elements of the artery begin to get very sticky and they begin to stick to the cell wall. And this plaque begins to grow. And you can see in the third image how right here, how the artery is beginning to be narrowed. And that restricts the blood flow. And even further, if it completely narrowed, of course, that would stop the flow of blood, and everything that was beyond that would not get the oxygen they need. And if that was to the heart, that would be a heart attack. And so this is the beginning. This is one of the causes of heart disease, heart attack. But of course, this is not actually the most common reason for a heart attack. Actually, most heart attacks, maybe only 10%, happen through a total blockage where the plaque is growing that far. The most common way that a heart attack comes about is shown in these slides right here. Again, in the top image, we have a healthy artery. The blood is flowing smoothly. In the second image, we have the formation of that plaque. And this is atherosclerosis. The artery is getting harder. It's less flexible. There's less circumference in the artery. So this creates high blood pressure. It creates shortness of breath. It creates chest pains. But again, usually that plaque will not grow to fill the whole thing. What will happen instead is, that as this plaque is growing, the top layer of that plaque is getting thinner and thinner. And with the blood rushing over it, what can happen is that plaque can burst. And you can see that in the third image there. The plaque bursts, the contents spill out into the artery, and then the body's own healing mechanisms rush in to try to do repair. But in rushing in, the artery is completely blocked, and that's the major cause of heart disease. Okay, so what happens when we change our diet and we eat a truly healthy diet? Well, what happens is that, for one thing, the plaque doesn't grow up. And so that's wonderful. We continue to have healthy blood vessels all of our lives. In fact, in those countries where they eat a predominantly whole food and a much more plant-based diet, even people in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s, they have clean and healthy arteries. But here in America, we see the beginning of plaque, not in our 60s, 70s, 80s. We actually are seeing it now in our children, the beginning of atherosclerosis. And that increases gradually over time. So it does take a long time to develop. It may not be till our 50s, 60s, 70s until we actually have heart disease or we can see it, but it's actually beginning in our children. But our bodies are uniquely designed to be able to protect them. The lining of our arteries is called the endothelial cells, and those produce a special gas called nitric oxide. That gas keeps our arteries clean and able to dilate and restrict and function well. But when we're eating foods that are not healthy for arteries and this plaque is growing, it's damaging our endothelial cells, damaging their ability to produce this nitric oxide, and therefore damaging the ability of our bodies to keep themselves healthy and strong. And so when we eat a healthy diet, then the reverse happens. We're nourishing our endothelial cells, and it's producing that nitric oxide, and it's restoring health to the arteries. And what happens then, if you look at that plaque, you may have plaque right now in your bodies, but when you change to a healthy diet, what happens is that top layer of the plaque then becomes stabilized, it becomes strong. And so it doesn't grow, and therefore it can't totally occlude the artery. And it also, very importantly, it can't burst. When it's stabilized and strong on top, it cannot burst. When you eat a healthy diet, this actually can happen to every one of the arteries in your body. And when that happens, you are essentially heart attack proof. And so this was the great news. This is the reason why Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn stated, If the truth be known, coronary artery disease is a toothless paper tiger that need never, ever exist. And if it does exist, it need never, ever progress. So just think, I mean, this was flooring to me. I hope it's of interest to you. This disease, the #1 killer in the whole world, is nothing but a toothless paper tiger. It can be prevented. It can be reversed. This was very exciting to me, and I decided that was something that I wanted to look into further. Well, what is a heart attack-proof diet? You might be wondering more of the details. Let me talk about the 3 principles in a heart attack-proof diet, a whole food plant-based diet. And here's the first principle. The first principle is that whole, relatively non-processed foods are the foundation for good health. They are the powerhouses of nutrition and beautifully designed to fuel our bodies. Now, what are these plant foods? Well, they're whole grains. They're fruits, the whole fruit, not the processed food. Vegetables, the whole vegetable, not processed, not refined, and legumes like beans, peas, and lentil. Now, these plant foods are powerhouses of nutrition. These plant foods are what create the fat, the protein, the carbohydrates that our bodies need. All of these are created by plant foods. They're the ones that produce all the vitamins that we need. These little plants, they're the ones that suck up from the soil the minerals that our bodies need. So the vitamins, the minerals, the phytochemicals, all of these are packed into these plants. And these are definitely protective for our bodies. Now, the second principle of a whole food plant-based diet is that animal foods are not needed for nutritional purposes and unavoidably contain harmful substances. They should be kept to a minimum, if eaten at all, for optimal health. So, as I said, here are the 3 types of animal foods: meat, dairy, and eggs. Do these contain nutrition? Yes, they do. They do contain some nutrition, but it's only a fraction of the nutrition that's in plant foods. The only reason that they contain nutrition is because the animals eat the plant foods. See, nutrition, the fat, the protein, the carbohydrates, the vitamins and minerals, the phytonutrients, all of those, they come from plants. They're only in animals, they're only in us because we eat the plants. But animals, when we eat them, they come packaged with lots of other things that are not so good for our body. For example, too much fat, particularly saturated fat. Cholesterol, too much cholesterol. Our bodies do not need dietary cholesterol because we produce our own cholesterol. And they also have too much protein. And so yes, we can get nutrients, but there's, like I said, come packaged with lots of other things. So we don't need them for nutrition, and our bodies do better without them. But of course, there are times when, if there are no plant foods, it might be very helpful to have animal foods. Here is the third principle of a whole food plant-based diet. And that is the bulk of our calories should come from starchy plants, which are primarily grains, such as wheat, barley, oats, rye, and millet. These are the foods that have fueled large, healthy populations throughout history. I love talking about starch foods, particularly grains. These foods are miracle foods. Again, they're plant foods, so they have all the nutrients that plant foods have, but they're also packed with the essential calories that we need. Not so packed with calories like junk food is, but packed with a healthy amount of calories, because calories are very important. We need that energy to fuel ourselves, to fuel our bodies. And they're so beautiful to look at. I think they're beautiful. And this is a very wholesome and also very inexpensive way to get nutritious calories into our bodies. So these are the principles of a whole food plant-based diet. Well, when I looked at this, I kind of thought to myself, well, how does this compare with the word of wisdom? These 3 principles. At that time when I was first learning, when I saw the show on CNN, even a quick look at the word of wisdom assured me that it seemed very compatible with the dietary wisdom in D&C 89. But then over the years, as I've looked even more closely at this dietary council, I've really become convinced that it reveals some important principles or helps us to see these principles in the word of wisdom in a different light. So I'd like to share what I discovered, and let's take a look at the word of wisdom itself. In the word of wisdom, of course, we have the usual prohibitions, which are so important. Abstaining from alcohol, tobacco, coffee, and tea. The church has been emphasizing this recently, and it's so important. This is very important for us. But also in Doctrine and Covenants 89, there are 3 dietary principles that are espoused by the Lord. Let's take a look at each one of them. Here's the first dietary principle. We can find this beginning the verses right after the prohibitions. So this is verse 10 and 11. In verse 10 and 11, we're taught that the Lord ordained wholesome herbs for our constitution, nature, and use. Every herb in the season thereof, and every fruit in the season thereof, to be eaten with prudence and thanksgiving. Now note the word herb. Herb means plants. So right here, the Lord is telling us that He ordained wholesome plants for our constitution, nature, and use, and to be eaten with prudence. I love the word prudence. So for example, potato chips are plants, but are they wholesome? And is it really prudent to eat the whole package? Here's some of the ways we can think about these verses that could help us in deciding the kinds of foods that we eat. Well, here are some of the beautiful, wholesome herbs or plants that the Lord has designed and ordained for our use. These really are powerhouses of nutrition, and they're very protective for our bodies. And the more we eat these plant foods, and plant foods are all plant foods actually, grains and legumes, vegetables, fruits, all plant foods, they're ordained for use. Let's go on to the second principle in the word of wisdom, the next 2 verses. Here the Lord says, verse 12, yea, flesh also of beast and the fowls of the air, I the Lord have ordained for the use of man with thanksgiving. Nevertheless, they are to be used sparingly. And it's pleasing unto me that they should not be used only in times of winter or of cold or of famine. Now, I love these 2 verses, and I love how the Lord does not really spell it all out for us. He gives us a chance to pray about this ourselves, study it out for ourselves. What does sparingly mean for us? What is sparingly? For example, I like what Hugh Nibley said, to spare the life of the animals. I like to think of sparingly too as like a spare tire in my car. And this goes along with verse 13, and it's pleasing to me that they not be used only in times of winter, cold, and famine. So to me, this suggests perhaps times of need, and to you it may suggest other things. I'll leave that for your own study and prayer. But to me, this is very loving and kind. The Lord actually ordained the flesh of animals for our use. It's ordained for our use. But he says it's better if we not use it except in times of need. Now, certainly there are times of need, right? Think about Lehi and his family crossing the wilderness and coming to the new world. That was a time of need. In fact, they ate raw meat in the wilderness, and the Lord made it sweet for them. Also think about the Latter-day Saint pioneers trekking across the plains to their new world. That was a time, too, where they were in need. They carried some food with them, but they shot the buffalo, and I'm sure they ate it with great thanksgiving. So definitely there are times of need. But sometimes we have the mistaken notion that protein is only found in meat. And actually that's not true. As I stated earlier, protein is actually created by, or the essential protein, the essential amino acids that our bodies need. Animals cannot produce those. They cannot create those essential amino acids, and we can't either. And that's why we like animals, need to eat plants because plants are the source of those essential amino acids, those essential proteins that our bodies need. And so plants are an excellent source of protein. Some contain more than others, but when we eat plant foods, we naturally get all of the protein that we need. It's not difficult. We don't have to combine certain plant foods together. Just naturally, when we eat the natural variety, we need enough calories, we simply get enough protein. We can certainly see this in the largest mammals on this earth. Did you know that the largest mammals on this earth, like the ones that are pictured here, all of these are herbivores? Herbivores, that means they're plant eaters. They don't eat any meat. And yet look, they're strong and healthy. They're certainly not lacking in protein. Why? Because plants contain all the protein that we need. And so eating plants can be healthier because they contain the nutrition without the extra stuff that maybe is not so good for us. So I'm just hypothesizing here why it might be pleasing to the Lord that we not eat meat except in times of winter, cold, and famine, except in times of need. Now, let's go on to the third principle in Doctrine and Covenants 89. This is in sections verses 14, 15, and 16. Here the Lord said that grain is ordained for the use of man and a beast to be the staff of life. Not just for man, but for the beasts of the field, the fowls of the heaven, and all wild animals that run or creep. And then verse 15, it says, and these, meaning the animals in verse 14, the wild animals, the fowls, and these hath God made for the use of man only in times of famine and excess of hunger. So here, he seems to be reiterating the point he made in verse 13. But then coming back to grains, he says, all grain is good for the food of man. So here we learn that grains are ordained by God to be the staff of life. Now, what does the staff of life mean? The staff of life means the staple of the diet. That's where the bulk of the calories for a population come from, that staple food of the population. And of course, grain is the staple food. Across the world, it's a staple food. And there are other starch foods that are also staple foods, like potatoes, the root tomatoes, the cassava. There's the plantain even. That's a fruit, but that can be a staple. And beans are also classified as grain. Of course, corn also is a grain. So these are the source of healthy, inexpensive calories. And these are the foods that the Lord ordained to be the staple of our diet. Well, when I looked at this, what was interesting to me was how having this understanding of the power of whole food, plant-based nutrition to have this dramatic impact on our bodies really helped me to see the principles in the Word of Wisdom in a new light and see if they don't maybe appear to a new light for you. So we have here the three principles. One, that plant foods are really the foundation of our diet. And they're the ones that are ordained for our use. Animal foods are important and ordained for our use. They contain nutrients and they can actually save our lives if we don't have anything else to eat. But where it's possible, we can not eat them and when we have plenty of plant foods and get all the nutrition that we need. And third, that starch foods, primarily grains, that is really the foundation of our diet. That's where the bulk of our calories should come from. So to me, this has been very, very illuminating. And I hope it'll be of interest to you and encourage you to do your own research. So when I saw this, I thought, wow, this is very impressive. I've already got two pieces of evidence that are very persuasive to me. First, this whole food plant-based nutrition, this diet, it prevents and reverses heart disease. And second, which is very important to me, it feels like it's in harmony with the dietary counsel in the Word of Wisdom. So this got me excited, these two pieces of evidence. Then, as I continued to research, the evidence continued to pile on, when I realized, number three, it's not just heart disease. We know that the arteries, the ones that I was talking about, are part of the creation of heart disease. The arteries don't just go to the heart. The arteries go to every part of the body. And when we eat foods that are not good for us, it affects all of the arteries in our body. It can affect the various parts of our bodies. Of course, we talk most about heart disease because when you block the oxygen and need nutrients to the heart, without the heart, we can die instantly. But these other diseases are also caused by blockage of arteries. The other one that's very, very serious, of course, is blockage of the artery to the brain. That causes a stroke, and that can cause sudden death also, a very debilitating disability. So these two are together cardiovascular diseases. But we have arteries that go to the eyes, the ears, the spine, the bowel, the legs. So all of these, when they're blocked, then they cause chronic disease. So this is very interesting to me because I realize it's not just this one disease, it's many other diseases. And of course, it's not just these cardiovascular diseases, because these foods that are not so good for us, the same type of inflammation that's caused in our arteries, it also causes inflammation and other damage to other organs of our bodies. So the thing that was striking to me was it's not just cardiovascular diseases. Actually, most of the chronic diseases that we experience today can be prevented or dramatically reduced through whole food, plant-based nutrition. Now, I've done the research subsequently. I didn't do it all this at that time, but I've done it subsequently and discovered that these are the types of diseases, the one displayed on this chart, that can be largely prevented or dramatically reduced by eating a truly healthy diet. Now look at this list. You might even pause the video and take a good look at it. You might have some of these diseases, or you might know some people who have these diseases. And it's amazing to think that these are diseases that are largely preventable through eating a healthy diet. But of course, don't take my word for it. I really encourage you to do your own research and find out for yourself the link between diet and these type of diseases. And here's two resources that I'd recommend for your use. One is a book called The China Study, and the other is a documentary you can find online called Forks Over Knives. Both of these are very good introductions, and then you can go on to do further research on my website. I cite a lot more resources. It's on discoveringthewordofwisdom.com. What this brought me to was this realization. It just makes sense that the human body runs best on certain foods. So this is evidence number 4 for me. Just like there's a proper diet for cats and a different diet for birds, it makes sense that there would be a proper diet for human beings. Just like we think about an engine, a car. Each car has a proper fuel that we give it. We don't feed our engines soy milk, do we? It wouldn't run well on soy milk. In fact, it doesn't run well on every type of fuel that could be given to it. If you had a beautifully designed custom engine, you wouldn't feed it the wrong fuel. If you gave it the wrong fuel, what would happen? Well, just like with our arteries, soon it would clog up the internal pipes and things going through the engine. And if you continue to give it the wrong fuel, it could be damaged so severely that it stops functioning altogether. Well, isn't that exactly what happens to our bodies? I mean, the Lord designed our bodies in a way that's infinitely more complex than even this beautiful engine right here. But if we don't eat the proper fuel, that is, if we don't eat the proper food, then our bodies, our arteries are going to get clogged up and we're going to start to slow down. And if we continue on that way, our bodies could fail completely. Here's a principle. Seemingly benign activities can have very serious consequences for our health. Hey, look, I'm sure to these teenagers, it feels like a lot of fun to be smoking with each other. they don't feel any effects, do they? It will be years, it will be decades before the effects of this smoking are realized and felt in their lives. But while they're having this fun time, something very terrible is happening to their lungs. It's being damaged because they're introducing substances that are not good for the body. And over time, this is gradually going to take a terrible toll. Well, in the same way, seemingly benign activities like enjoying fun foods with our families. I mean, it's fun to eat processed foods with our families. I mean, that's something all of us, even me, we grew up on these type of foods. They're fun to eat. We're having a good time together. But seemingly benign activities can lead to very, very serious consequences in our health. While we're eating these foods are really not designed for our constitution, nature, and use. And so they're doing some very terrible things to our arteries. They're damaging those endothelial cells. There's plaque growing in our arteries, growing in our heart, and other damages happening in our body. And again, it may take years. It may take decades to see the result. But sooner or later, something's going to happen. And we're suddenly not going to feel very well. And we're going to think, oh, now I've got cardiovascular disease. Now I've got cancer. But actually, it's been growing for years. It's been growing from decades. And it's being caused slowly by the type of foods that we eat. And so this is the type of thing that I would like to see prevented. When we look at these pictures, when we see these kind of illnesses, aren't these the destroying angels of our time? You know, in the word of wisdom, the Lord gives us beautiful promises about you'll run and not be weary, and you'll find treasures, even hidden treasures of great knowledge. In the final verse, he says that if we keep these sayings, that the destroying angel will pass us by. Now, the destroying angel, what's a destroying angel in our day? Is it not these type of diseases? Of course, it's not just limited to that. I think the Lord is primarily talking also about the destroying spiritual angels, those that are affecting us spiritually. But even our nutrition, our physical health, it also has a big impact on our spiritual well-being. And so here's a promise that if we eat according to the principles in the word of wisdom, the destroying angel will pass us by. Well, after I looked at this, I thought to myself, first, if our bodies can heal themselves given the proper fuel, most chronic disease is inevitable. I never considered that before. I thought chronic disease was inevitable. And this sounds like the diet that humans are meant to be eating. And so this must mean that people who eat this way must see amazing results. And this was evidence number 5. Not only did all of this science add up to the power of whole food plant-based nutrition, but I literally came across hundreds of very compelling stories. And let me tell you some of the stories that I saw. Here is Mark Romanus. Now, Mark Romanus, his family and extended family had a long history of lots of diabetes and other chronic disease. After Mark was diagnosed with diabetes, he was put on 5 oral medications and insulin injections. And his doctor told him that he could never be cured. But only in less than 2 months after going whole food plant-based, Mark was off of all medication. He's no longer diabetic and he feels fantastic. And this is typical for people who have diabetes. Diabetes is highly, highly correlated with the foods that we eat. And we can both prevent and resolve diabetes, type 2 diabetes, that is, with whole food plant-based nutrition. This is Emily Brandehoff. She was 34 years old when she was diagnosed with crippling rheumatoid arthritis. Her pain was so excruciating that she couldn't lay down, she couldn't sit, she couldn't stand, she couldn't walk anything without a lot of pain, and she couldn't lift anything with ease. The doctors recommended chemotherapy and an immune system suppressant, but it had terrible side effects. So she decided to try a whole food plant-based diet. Within 3 months, she had hardly any pain and felt great. Her doctors ordered blood work, which came back normal with just slight inflammation. And most patients with rheumatoid arthritis, they see these same type of results. Nina and Randy are twins. They grew up actually eating plant-based foods, but they weren't eating whole foods. They were eating a lot of processed foods, including a lot of oils. These are highly processed. And then they got acne, and they decided to eliminate the processed foods, including the oils from their diet, and their skin completely cleared up. And this is true for most people with acne, including very severe acne. Now this person, I love this story. This is Eric O'Gray. He was 51 years old when his doctor recommended that he might want to get a funeral plot, because if his diet and his body did not change quickly, he was going to die within the next 5 years. He had type 2 diabetes, very high cholesterol, high blood pressure, and weighed 145 kilos at just 176 centimeters. His medications cost well over $1,000 a month. That's US dollars. And New Zealand dollars, that would be over 1,500 New Zealand dollars a month. He was constantly exhausted and sleeping 10 to 12 hours a night. It was becoming harder and harder to walk, and he couldn't tie his shoes or walk up the stairs without becoming out of breath. Then after changing to a whole food plant-based diet, Eric lost the weight and all of the chronic health conditions resolved. Eric says, I love this quote, "I have friends again and feel attractive for the first time in my life. After I lost my weight and got in shape, I found that I enjoyed long distance running, and I even qualified for the Boston Marathon." I thought that's great. This is Alicia Jackman. She's a Latter-day Saint, and a little short on time, but so I'll maybe abbreviate her story, but she got a very serious illness called ulcerative colitis. It causes painful swelling in the joints, and her joints were so swollen that she couldn't tie shoes or button buttons. And this is very hard if you're a mother with young children. She couldn't, her knees and her ankles were so swollen she couldn't get on the floor and play with them. She would cry in pain every day and felt like an 80-year-old woman, even though she was in her early 30s. You can imagine it's very distressing for a young Latter-day Saint mom. Alicia's doctors put her on some serious medications that ended up costing 14,000 US dollars. That's well over 22,000 New Zealand dollars per infusion. But they did little good, and they caused serious side effects. And so when she learned about whole food plant-based nutrition and changed her diet, her symptoms went away, and she was able to get off all the medications her doctors told her she would have to take the rest of her life. Now she can do the things she wants to do, and even took first place in a 10K run. So these are just a small sample of the stories that I saw of dramatic results. Now, of course, not every disease is related to diet, but again, I'm talking about the chronic diseases, the destroying angels of our day. Going on, the sixth piece of evidence that I found. This was compelling to me. It's in no one's financial interest, I realized, that I eat healthy and get well. As I looked into whole food plant-based nutrition, I noticed nobody was really trying to sell me anything. They weren't trying to get me money, to pay them, to give me some knowledge, or to sell me some drug or supplement or something like that. And this was compelling to me because I realized actually eating a healthy diet doesn't make the other people a lot of money. And so no wonder people don't sell this. To be successful eating a whole food plant-based diet, number one, I don't need to buy anything from any expert. That was impressive to me because there's all these experts there online freely giving their information and not asking me to buy anything of them. Two, I don't need to buy supplements or gadgets or whatever. Three, I can get all the food I need at the local grocery store. In fact, this diet is very inexpensive. When you look at these foods, you should recognize these foods. You should recognize that most of these foods you can get in your own grocery store, and they're not very expensive. And this is important because even the poor people of this world can eat healthy foods. And this makes sense to me that the Lord would design the proper diet for our bodies, not some expensive, esoteric, special foods that only certain people can get. No, it's the plain, wholesome plant foods that we can get all over the world. Those are the things that are good for our bodies. This is the last piece of evidence I want to share with you today, and that is that this piece of evidence that convinced me that this is a good direction. The same diet that's good for our bodies is also good for the earth, and it's good for the animals. Now, why is this important to me? Well, it's important because the Lord made us stewards of this earth. And I take that as a sacred responsibility to care for the earth, to care for the planets. And it just makes me wonder if maybe this possibly is the reason why it is pleasing to the Lord if we not eat the animals except in times of need. Well, after evaluating all this evidence, I was personally convinced this seems like the diet that we humans are supposed to be eating, the diet that we'll thrive on. So I decided to take the plunge. Well, what was the result? Now, again, I wasn't taking the plunge because I had a lot of serious health conditions. In fact, I didn't really have any serious health conditions, but I did have quite a few very nagging small problems that really bothered me that in retrospect, I can see would have become more serious over time. What were they? Well, I was about 20, 25 pounds overweight. I had a blocked saliva gland. When I ate a lot of food, then they would swell up. I had these leg cramps at night that were very uncomfortable when I tried to sleep. I had very dry, itchy eyes. I put some drops into my eyes frequently. And I had very itchy parts and other parts of my body. High cholesterol and constipation, not fun. So what happened? What happened to me personally when I completely changed my diet? Well, what happened was I lost all of that weight. I lost it all. It was gone. The blocked saliva gland, gone. The leg cramps, gone. Itchy eyes, gone. All of these were gone. Were these life-threatening? Well, at the time, no, they weren't life-threatening. They may have become more life-threatening, but no, they weren't life-threatening. But they were just, they weren't making life fun. And it was really nice just to be completely gone. Now I feel full of energy. I feel healthy. It's impacted me mentally. More importantly, it's impacted me spiritually. I personally feel closer to the Lord, more able to receive guidance from the Spirit. I feel like I have been blessed with those great treasures of knowledge, even hidden treasures. And best of all, I didn't sacrifice good food. I love my food now. I'm going to show you some pictures of whole plant-based foods. Now, I must admit, at first it was hard for me for two reasons. One, I wasn't used to the taste of new foods. And two, I didn't know how to cook it. But that just took a few weeks for my taste to change, to learn how to cook, and now I'm thoroughly enjoying the foods. Here's some of the foods you can see. They look tasty, and they are tasty. You learn new ways of cooking, and that's kind of fun. And you enjoy the taste of the food, and it's healthy, and it makes you feel good. So here's some of the foods. Whole food, plant-based. Even some nice treats, whole food, plant-based. They're wonderful. What I learned, brothers and sisters, was nothing tastes as good as feeling good feels. And we can learn to adjust our taste. And we don't have to sacrifice taste. It tastes wonderful. Yes, those other foods, they taste wonderful too. But they're doing something to our bodies that's not so wonderful. Let me quote, I'm getting here close to the end. I want to quote from our beloved president, Russell M. Nelson. This is from last April General Conference. He said, "We need to do better and be better because we're in a battle. The adversary is quadrupling his efforts. He's arming his minions with potent weapons to keep us from partaking of the joy and love of the Lord. There are specific ways in which we can likely improve. One way is the way we treat our bodies." Now, this is a theme that President Nelson has come to time and time again over the years. As a former cardiovascular surgeon, he has a great love for and respect for the body. He knows that Satan impacts us through our body. And so the way we treat our bodies is one way that we can do better and gear ourselves up in the work of the Lord. To continue, Elder Nelson says, "Your body is your personal temple, created to house your eternal spirit. Your care of that temple is important. How you treat your body sends a direct message to Him, to the Lord, about your feelings regarding His transcendent gifts to you. In this reverence for our bodies, I think we can do better and be better. Now, I certainly agree. And eating a healthy diet is one way we certainly can do this. And of course, President Nelson does set a good example for us. The brethren do not tell us, eat like I eat. They say, eat as it says in the Word of Wisdom. But we all know that President Nelson loves his vegetables. One fun story that I heard that I thought was great was Elder Spencer J. Condi, when he was traveling with Elder Nelson, noticed all the vegetables he was eating and very little meat. And he asked Elder Nelson, "Don't you ever eat roast beef, potatoes, and gravy?" And President Nelson said, "After many years of performing open heart surgery, I know where that stuff ends up." And after hearing me today, I think you understand what Elder Nelson saw. But he actually opened the bodies of people, and he saw that plaque right here in this. We can see this artery right here. I'm trying to use, hopefully you can see this. There's an artery, and you can see there's the pliers right here, and they're pulling out this plaque. This artery should be empty and it's full of plaque. Well, that is where all that food ends up. And that is what we want to try to avoid. And that's what we can avoid simply by eating a healthy diet. Now, is eating this way too extreme? Some of you might be thinking, just eating whole foods and plant foods, is this extreme? Let me share with you what Dr. Caldwell Esselstyn said. He said, some people think that plant-based whole food diet is extreme. 500,000 a year will have their chest open up and a vein taken from their leg and sewn onto their coronary artery. Some people would call that extreme. I'd call that extreme. And this is a quote from Dr. John McDougall. Open heart surgery is radical. Eating oatmeal and potatoes is not radical. Brothers and sisters, eating the wholesome plants that the Lord ordained for our constitution nature of use is not radical. Following the principles in the Word of it is not radical. Yes, the rest of the world thinks that not smoking, not drinking, no coffee, no tea, they think that's radical. We know that's not radical. That's just common sense, and it helps us to be healthy. In the same way, the Dietary Council is there to give us good health, and it's not radical. It just makes us healthy. I'm going to conclude with this quote from President Joseph Fielding Smith. And he said, "A safe guide to each and all is this. If in doubt as to any food or drink, whether it's good or harmful, let it alone until you've learned the truth in regard to it." So this is good counsel. You do your own research. You study, you pray, prayerfully read the Word of Wisdom, and decide what is right for you. And if you're not sure of any food, leave it alone until you've learned the truth of it. And there's lots of places to learn some good truth, not just in the scriptures, but also through our study of good books. I recommend the China Study, the documentary Forks Over Knives. I also recommend Dr. Esselstyn's excellent book, Prevent and Reverse Heart Disease. It's a wonderful book. But remember, our yardstick should be the Word of Wisdom. That's what we should use to measure. The truth will be in harmony with the Word of Wisdom. If it helps you, please come to my website. I have lots of resources there, all free. You can get resources and read lots of stories. I've the stories of hundreds of Latter-day Saints who have adopted a whole food plant-based diet, including several from saints in New Zealand, including the one that I featured here. This is Kevin Tunstall, and he lives in the great country New Zealand, and he has a marvelous story about what happened to him when he got cancer and he adopted a whole food plant-based diet. So yeah, come to the website if that's at all interest to you. The website address is right there, discoveringthewordofwisdom.com. Feel free also to email me with any questions that you have. Now, brothers and sisters, I've gone a little over time. My apologies. But I'm so enthusiastic and passionate about sharing this great message with you. Thank you for giving me the honor and pleasure of doing that. I have a testimony. The Lord loves us. He gave us these precious bodies so that we could experience life. Our bodies run best on certain fuel, on certain foods. And the Lord in Doctrine and Covenants 89, he tells us what those foods are. And for me, the science and the clinical evidence behind whole food plant-based nutrition helped me open my eyes more to the word of wisdom. It helped me to discover the word of wisdom in a new way. And I hope that some of this message that I've shared with you today will help you to discover the word of wisdom in a way maybe that you haven't seen before. And I pray that that will be a blessing and help to you, and that you'll find the answers that are right and valuable for you right now at this time of your life, for you and your family. I bear testimony of our Savior, Jesus Christ. I know he loves us. I know he wants us to have good health, not just for our temporal needs, but also for our spiritual needs. Enable us to have the energy we need to do the work of the Lord. And I say this in the holy name of Jesus Christ. Amen.